Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Imonar the Soulhunter on Normal and Heroic in Antorus, the Burning Throne.
So this is a 3-phase encounter that is located on 2 platforms connected by a bridge. Each phase is triggered at health percentages and is separated by an intermission where you must traverse the bridge that is scattered with traps. Each phase has different abilities, and understanding them all and how to counter them is key to defeating this fight. Let's kick it off and talk about phase 1.
Now during this first phase, ranged players should be spread around the platform. On a timer, the boss will throw out pulse grenades at typically ranged players. Running into one of these deals a large amount of nature damage, but will also knock players back, potentially off the platform completely. You'll also receive a 50% nature damage taken increase debuff for 20 seconds, and you cannot immune either the knockback or this damage taken effect. You should stand near active grenades to try and keep them as stacked as possible. These grenades do not despawn, and you will be using this platform in the final phase of the fight, so the tighter the grenades, the better. To improve on space further, you can use Bloodlust in this phase just to get through it as soon as you possibly can. Any grenades that spawn in melee should be soaked by a single player, as moving the boss around in this phase can make dealing with the other ability in this phase much more difficult for melee players, and this other ability is Sleep Canister. The boss will target 2 players, and after a short notification will throw a canister at them. This puts the player to sleep for 20 seconds, however this can be dispelled. When dispelled, this will cause all other players within 10 yards to be stunned for 8 seconds. As ranged players are spread, they can pretty much be instantly dispelled, assuming that nobody's within 10 yards of them, however this is not the case for melee. The best way to deal with this mechanic is by having 2 world icons in melee just over 10 yards apart. The entire melee camp should stack on one icon, and the moment someone is hit by a canister, the entire group should move to the other icon. The melee player hit by the canister should then call for a dispel once all players have moved to the other icon. Finally to mention in this phase is the tank mechanic, Shock Lance. This is a large physical hit that applies a stacking 10% damage taken increase for 20 seconds. Each stack also bursts damage onto an individual player. So the higher your stacks, the more damage you take, but also the more damage random raid members will take. It is important to keep this stack as low as possible. You should taunt on 4 stacks or sooner if your debuff has dropped. Once you've managed to nail down these pulse grenades and sleep canisters, the boss will transition into phase 2 at 66% health.
At this point, he'll move to the other platform at the end of the bridge and begin to cast Conflagration. You must go and interrupt this cast to begin phase 2. On Heroic, it's important that this is done quickly, as the Conflagration cast is also dealing ticking damage to the entire raid that ramps in intensity. The bridge, however, is now covered in traps. You have the pulse grenades from phase 1, and a new trap which is the stasis trap. Running into this new trap causes you to take a small amount of damage, but also stun yourself and any nearby players for 8 seconds. You can, however, dispel this effect. You'll also have fires that coat the edge of the bridge. These fires are extremely dangerous, do not run into them under any circumstance, and on Heroic you'll also have flaming orbs to dodge. These deal a large amount of damage and slow you for 8 seconds if you're hit. Running over the bridge for the first time is easily done, as it's unlikely that you'll have any traps directly blocking your path, but if you are blocked, then you can have a single player run into the stasis traps and then be dispelled immediately afterwards. That's the best choice. And before you think about it, no, immunities do not work on any of the bridge traps. They'll only act as a damage immunity. All other effects from the traps will still hit you. Once you've made it to the other side, interrupt the conflagration and phase 2 will begin.
Now range positioning in phase 2 should be very similar to phase 1. You instead have the shrapnel blast mines instead of grenades. These work very similar, except they deal damage to the raid when they spawn, and if triggered apply a nasty dot to nearby players instead of knocking them back. You want to dodge these just like you did the grenades in phase 1. If any of these shrapnel blast mines land in melee, you can just simply move the boss around, or even just have the off tank quickly run into them to clear them up. The other mechanic for all players to be wary of in this phase is charged blasts. When the boss casts this, 2 spaceships will spawn somewhere on the sides of the platform. They will then each fixate a single player. After 7 seconds, they will then fire a beam towards that player, dealing damage to anyone within the animation, and this also knocks back and applies a dot. Players fixated by this must immediately move from the raid and position themselves so that they are the only player hit, whilst also taking into account the knockback. You will be knocked from the platform if you're stood too close to the edge, and this will kill you. Lastly, tanks will need to deal with Sever. This is just a large physical hit that applies a nasty dot. Simply taunt off each other at 2 stacks. Aside from that, just get the boss to 33% and you'll have your last bridge phase.
This is the same as the last time you went across the bridge, except you'll now have shrapnel blast mines on top of the previous traps that you had from the first time you went across the bridge. Additionally, you'll also have blast wires. Running into one of these wires will cause it to despawn, whilst dealing a large burst of damage to everyone in the raid. As there are so many more objects to now avoid, it becomes increasingly difficult to move across the bridge without hitting one. The raid damage up to this point, so all the damage that you've been taking during phase 1 and 2, you can easily outheal without using any healing cooldowns. As you move across the bridge this final time, this is where you'll want to chain the majority of them. We deliberately clear any annoying traps or blast wires and simply just counter them by throwing cooldowns at it. Keep in mind that indeed you are moving whilst this is all going on, so some cooldowns are going to be much better than others. Tranks, revivals, aura masteries, rallies, etc. are all fantastic, whereas a him, not so good. While running into these traps, just keep in mind that the effects from the pulse grenades, the stasis traps, and the shrapnel blast mines all affect nearby players roughly 3 yards from the player that procs them, so it's wise to have a single player lead the charge across the bridge and prioritise dispels and damage reductions on that particular player. Just be careful while leading the group that you watch raid health before breaking a blast wire. Once you've reached the other side, you can interrupt his conflagration and phase 3 will begin.
Now in this phase you want to spread just like you did in the previous 2 phases. Pulse Grenade will make a return, however now they are empowered. Instead of becoming an object for you to avoid within the room, they are now placed on random range players as a 45-second long debuff. The debuff deals ticking damage but also causes you to knock back any players within 5 yards, so being pre-spread solves this knockback issue. However, you also now need to avoid empowered shrapnel blasts. On a timer, the room will be bombarded. You must avoid all of the swirly circles, otherwise you'll take a nasty burst of damage and receive a permanent stacking dot. Players with the empowered pulse grenade debuff need to be especially careful here to make sure that you do not knock other players into these landing zones. Lastly, tanks will have shock lance to deal with from phase 1, however the stack no longer drops and instead will stack until you die or the boss does. You want to swap every 3 stacks or so, slowly raising the stacks on each tank so the raid damage is steady. If your stacks go extremely high and you wipe to raid damage, you may wish to save Bloodlust for this phase instead. This does however mean that you'll have far more pulse grenades from phase 1 to deal with on this platform during this last phase. This is simply something you'll have to find the balance for and work out yourselves depending on your comp. But that's it for phase 3. The difficult part of this entire encounter really is the second bridge. If you can deal with that, then you should be absolutely fine.
If you'd like a reference on your other screen whilst doing this encounter, or would just like some handy notes to go through, then go check out our guide for this encounter over on Wowhead. The link for that is in the description. And before we do go, if this video did help you at all, then drop us down a like, but if you wish to support us even further, like the awesome people you see on screen now, then go check out our Patreon page. That is also in the description. Thank you very much guys, and we shall see you all in the next guide.
Thanks for watching.
Take care.